Welcome back to the next episode of Arrakis Central. In this video, we're going to be talking about Paul Atreides, his background, and go a little bit in depth into what his actual powers are. But remember, if you do like this content, please remember to like and subscribe to support this channel. Now let's begin. In the most current rendition of Dune on screen, the 2021 film, and then the upcoming Dune Part 2, Paul Atreides is played by the actor Timothée Chalamet, but he's also been played by different actors in the past, such as the 1984 film by Kyle MacLachlan and in the Dune 2000 miniseries by Alec Newman. Paul Atreides is the main protagonist from the first Dune novel, and he would be the main focus of many of the books that Frank Herbert wrote. So, Paul Atreides was the son of Duke Leto Atreides and Lady Jessica from the planet Caladan. Within the Dune timeline, Paul Atreides was born in the year 10,176 after the establishment of the Spacing Guild. But just as a disclaimer before we dig deeper into Paul Atreides, this video could have spoilers for the upcoming Dune Part 2, so watch with caution if you do not want to be spoiled. So Paul Atreides, as being born on the planet Caladan and being the heir for House Atreides, his father being Duke Leto Atreides and his mother being the Bene Gesserit sister, Lady Jessica, he was part of a genetic breeding program by the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood in order to produce a female Kwisatz Haderach, which was their super being. As I've talked about in previous videos, Lady Jessica would defy the Sisterhood and provide Duke Leto with a son instead of a daughter, which would be Paul. His mother would go on to train him in all the skills that a Bene Gesserit sister would have. So the Kwisatz Haderach was a high elevated being which would possess all the skills of a Reverend Mother, all the skills of a superior mentat, which is a human thinking computer, and would be able to see all possible pathways and futures of any choice he would make. And I think that's where some of the confusion on Paul Atreides was, that his powers were not supernatural. They were brought down through generations of selective breeding to provide those traits, and once unlocked with the spice, he would become an all-seeing, essentially ultimate superhuman. And as like stated earlier, he was supposed to be a Bene Gesserit sister, a female, in which the sisterhood could control. But as we know, that did not happen. Another aspect about Paul that is not covered extensively in the movies was his training from childhood, and not just Bene Gesserit skills by his mother, but he was also given years of training by the different agents of the Atreides family, like Gurney Halleck, Duncan Idaho, Thufir Hawat, that trained him in all nobility aspects. So he learned combat strategy, actual hand-to-hand combat skills, all of the technology, all of the language skills, all the skills that a normal noble child would learn to become the next duke of that Atreides family. So he was very skilled tactician, knowledge-wise, and with all the knowledge he would need to run the future House Atreides. I always thought that was a very interesting aspect, combining that with his powers once he becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, of how deadly that Paul was. So once the Atreides family is sent to Dune to take over the fiefdom, Paul is exposed to large amounts of the spice, which slowly starts to unlock his powers, as shown in the 2021 Dune film. In the 2021 film, Paul early on is seeing visions of a Fremen girl on the planet Arrakis, which would end up being Chani. So he's already having slight premonitions before he's even exposed to large amounts of the spice. But once he actually gets into the deep desert, after their escape from the Harkonnen henchmen on the Ornithopter, after the attack on Arrakeen, Paul will really start to feel the effects of his abilities. Slowly, his powers of foresight start to unlock all the different, not only futures, but he also can see the past. So it is a scene in the book when Paul is in the tent with his mother after they are hiding from the Harkonnens and trying to survive in the desert. They're in a tent, and Paul will come to the revelation that he has seen that his grandfather is actually the Baron Harkonnen without ever having any knowledge of that, and that his mother was actually the daughter of the Baron. Also, during this part in the book, he would make the decision to join the Fremen and follow that path in which he would become the religious zealot of the Fremen, which would end up being Muad'Dib. He followed the path that would take him to become the main leader of the Fremen eventually, and he would launch a jihad across the galaxy in order to take over the entire Landsrad and Imperium. So there becomes like a 2.5 year time where Paul slowly becomes the leader of the Fremen. They bring spice production to almost a complete standstill on Arrakis. At this time, they don't actually know, or Harkonnens and the Emperor don't actually know that Muad'Dib is Paul Atreides. They believe Paul Atreides is dead this whole time. And that's when we'll have the revelation that Gurney Halleck is alive. Paul reunites with him. As he sets a trap for smugglers, he realizes that is Gurney, and Gurney then joins Paul as well. In another area, which is not encountered in the films, is that Paul would actually have a son, the first Leto son, with Chani, but he would be assassinated while Paul was launching the attack on Arrakeen, the Harkonnens, and the Emperor that came to Arrakis. And that part of the book is very washed over in the films. It's never even talked about. So he did have a son with Chani originally, and that son would be murdered. But this is going to be a spoiler for the upcoming film. Paul, along with the Fremen, will win against the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar and essentially trap the Emperor there on Arrakis. And they would have a confrontation there in a throne room of sorts, in which he would fight to the death Fade Routha after the Baron is killed by Paul's Bene Gesserit younger sister, Alia. And instead of killing the Emperor and totally throwing the Landsrad and the Imperium to chaos, Paul outcasts him and decides to marry his daughter, Princess Erelon, in name only, and would keep Chani as his concubine to bear children with. This would cross over into the next book, Dune Messiah, and where a plot is cast against Paul to get rid of him because he has enraged every aspect of the Imperium, the Chom Company, the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit, and all their factions that want Paul gone, because he's essentially cut spice production to what the original levels were. Also in Dune Messiah, the Thalaxu will make a Gola, or a reanimated version of Duncan Idaho. Paul is intrigued. He knows it's a trap. He knows they've embedded this Gola of Duncan Idaho with orders to assassinate him or do something to him. Princess Erelon was also jealous of Chani and actually wanted to have an heir with Paul during the book. And she would secretly feed contraceptive poison essentially to Chani so she couldn't bear children. Chani would go on to bear 2 children, the twins of Paul, but would later die in childbirth due to the poisoning. Paul would also be blinded during this period by an assassination attempt in which he would lose his eyesight, and he would maintain his foresight and his ability to survive these attacks, but then he would end up having a complete meltdown and walk into the desert after the loss of Chani, after she dies during that childbirth. There are many books covering this after the events that Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, wrote that fill in much of the information during this time, such as with Paul of Dune and other books, Winds of Dune as well. But essentially, Paul would not die in the desert like they think they would after Alia becomes the regent of the Imperium. but he would actually become a preacher of sorts and would eventually be killed. This would lead to his son, Leto II, becoming the God Emperor after Paul's death. But I appreciate you watching this video. I know there's a lot of information in here, but I do recommend everyone go read the books. And then I personally do like the Frank Herbert novels that are fillers in between, that give knowledge gaps in between those books, and they add a lot more to the whole world. I do realize there are many Dune fans out there who do not like the Brian Herbert books. I am not one of them. I like all the books, and there's a lot more information added to the story of Dune. But that is up to the personal preference of the reader. But if you do like this video, please like and subscribe, and I plan on doing a follow-up video to delve deeper into the events of Paul's death. Thank you for watching.